While playing through and making my video on Trails of Cold Steel 3, I slowly began to realize that there are very few games that properly age its characters. Sure, there are plenty of games that have time skips and age their characters physically in their stories, but oftentimes their growth is just that, physical, and if it's reflected internally, it's only slightly. There are very few examples of games I can think of where the story and writing truly reflect that its characters have aged. In this video, I want to talk about the games I've played that have effectively aged its characters, why each example was so successful in doing so, and why I feel that games don't do this more often. Side note, I have not played every single video game in existence, so if you feel you have an example that applies here that I didn't cover, let me know in the comments, but don't be coming at me with it. Playing through Trails of Cold Steel 3 and seeing how well it aged its characters was my main inspiration for even making this video in the first place. I'm honestly shocked that so few people talk about how well it was handled here. Trails of Cold Steel 3 is one of, if not the only game that I've played that has taken its established party of characters and aged them from high school students to working class adults, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that. Trails of Cold Steel 1 opens with the protagonist, Rein Schwarzer, starting his first day of what I'm going to call high school along with the other party members of the game. In this game, they're around 16 to 17 years old and most of them are coded as early high schoolers. By the beginning of Trails of Cold Steel 3, they've all aged to working class adults, graduated, and have gone their separate ways in life, getting jobs, following their passions, etc. The twist here is that Rein is now a professor at the same academy he attended in the first two games and is teaching his own students the same way he was taught by his own teacher a few years prior. This literal and narrative graduation from the role of student to professor is what I think is important to express when aging characters and stories. Here, Rein didn't just get physically older after the time skip, but both his internal and external dialogue reflects his personal growth and insecurities that come with becoming an adult and an educator. To use a direct example, there's a scene early on in the game where Rein has to discipline his students in front of his old classmates. Rein's students demand to back him up in an upcoming fight, but Rein doesn't think that they're strong nor dependable enough to not become a liability when it's time to fight. He makes the difficult decision here to tell them this directly and even calls them out on each of their individual flaws and weaknesses. He outright said it. Yes sir! Yes sir! That boy, dude, Rein. They reluctantly leave, and afterward he acknowledges how much his students' immaturity reminds him of his own flaws in the previous games, and how strong his own teacher, Sarah, was for handling these situations for their own class. Rein took the same cautionary approach that Sarah did with his class in Cold Steel 1 and 2 with his students here in Cold Steel 3. Just like his students in this scene, Rein in Cold Steel 1 and 2 was a character that was reckless and that he would always be ready to sacrifice himself to help others without considering his own safety or consequences. Rein saw this in his students and decided to tell them, hey, listen, don't do that, don't be like me. This scene playing out the way it did this early on in the game completely changed my opinion on Rein and showed me how much he's grown between Cold Steel 2 and 3. I think that even though Cold Steel 3 Rein retains his defining character traits from Cold Steel 1 and 2, he can still be classified as a completely different character when compared to Cold Steel 2 Rein, and I think that's the most important approach to take when writing a character with the intention of aging them. Telltale's The Walking Dead arguably has the most unique protagonist development I've seen in a video game. The original season follows the protagonist Lee Everett becoming the guardian of an 8-year-old girl named Clementine, the deuteragonist of the story. As the game progresses, you as the player make decisions to protect not only yourself but Clementine as well. The choices you make have an impact on how Clementine views Lee along with people in the world that she's forced to navigate, meaning that you as the player through Lee have the ability to directly influence Clementine's character throughout the first season of the game. Father figure and daughter dynamics are nothing new to video games, but where the story really gets interesting is in the second season. In the second season of The Walking Dead, the story grants the role of protagonist to Clementine herself, who is now a 9-year-old girl trying to survive through the zombie apocalypse, except she's on her own now. Clementine has been forced to mature early due to the traumatic events of the first season, and she can now be considered a completely different character. Again, this representation of growth and character development is what I think is important to consider when aging characters in a story. I'm gonna keep it real though, I have not played past the second season of The Walking Dead as of writing this, so I'm gonna just go off of what I know, But season 3 and 4 of The Walking Dead follows a 13 and eventually 16-year-old Clementine taking the role of guardian to a baby that grows into a toddler, which is a direct parallel to the relationship she had with Lee in the first season. Clementine's development as a character deserves a whole video on its own, honestly, but I just want to acknowledge how impressive and unique this character's development and growth has been in regards to the topic of this video. Dragon Quest V is arguably the best example of what I'm talking about in this video because it's literally the entire thematic and narrative focus of the game. Each act of Dragon Quest V guides its protagonist through 3 major phases of life: childhood at 6 years old, teenage years at 16 years old, and adulthood at around his mid-20s. Without getting into direct spoilers, the game begins in the hero's childhood where you're following your father on his quest and eventually ends with the hero having his own kids and continuing his quest alongside them. By the 3rd act of the game, Dragon Quest V has taken its protagonist through each of the development stages of life and has placed him in the same role as his father in the beginning of the game. The reason that Dragon Quest V is regarded as such a timeless classic is because it didn't limit itself to one specific phase of life like most games do, but instead it focused on pretty much every phase of life. This allows the story to be experienced by a wide spread of audiences and allows for players to re-experience the story from a different perspective years or even decades later as they grow up. I played Dragon Quest V when I was 12 and 17 years old, and I got something completely different out of it each time, and I'm sure as I get older and experience more in life, I'll be able to continue to have that same experience with the story again and again. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time focuses on jumping back and forth from the ages of 10 to 17 to save Hyrule and defeat Ganon. Throughout Link's journey across time, he meets friends and allies that assist him with their skills and most importantly, their songs. As Link travels throughout time and loses the ability to use certain items and access certain locations, the one thing that remains consistent across time are these songs and the bonds that Link has built with the people that taught him. This gameplay element adds to the theme of the game in that regardless of how much the world changes as you get older, the bonds and knowledge you create will remain. But this isn't a video on Ocarina of Time, I just wanted to throw this in there because I honestly didn't know how else to approach this. I'm kind of writing this last minute. But at the end of Ocarina of Time, Link reverts back to his original age and continues his journey, which is continued in Majora's Mask. It's through this game where we see how much Link has grown since Ocarina of Time. Within the first minutes of gameplay, we see Link doing flips and showing off for himself as he presses onward, fully confident in his ability that he gained from Ocarina of Time. As the game progresses, he's now able to use items and techniques that he was previously unable to use as a child in Ocarina of Time. He's practiced and retained the knowledge taught by those who have assisted him in the first game across time, further reflecting the theme of Ocarina of Time through its gameplay once again. But to tie this back into the theme of the video and not just make this an Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask analysis, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask reflect growing characters through its gameplay and its narrative, which I think is super unique, and I didn't really appreciate that when I was growing up playing this game. These portrayals of characters growing up are so effective because each of these stories takes their protagonists and places them into the roles of the people who raised them or watched them grow while making their influence still apparent, which is important. Throughout each of these stories, for the most part, we can directly witness how these characters navigate their current lives using what they were taught by their mentors or parent figures. We see this in Trails of Cold Steel 3 in the way that instructor Sarah directly influenced the way that Rean teaches his own students. We see this in The Walking Dead in the way that Clementine uses the survival techniques that Lee taught her. We see this through Dragon Quest V's entire story, and we see this in Ocarina of Time through the music that you learn from the sages and through its gameplay. An important question to ask is why do so few games attempt to age their characters, and if they do, why are they not as impactful as the examples I covered in this video? I've come up with 2 reasons why most games oftentimes aren't able to age its characters. 1. Few stories are equipped to actually be able to age their characters in world without it feeling forced. The examples I used here from long-running franchises are stories that were written with the intention of aging its characters. Each of these games devote hours and sometimes even full games to properly develop its mentor or parent figures, and I think that's why these examples are so effective. With most game narratives being written to be annual or biannual sequels, one-offs, or stories that pick up exactly where the previous left off, many stories are just unable to develop and age their characters to this extent from both a narrative or financial standpoint. 2. The original target audience might not be able to resonate with the new ages of the protagonist. Stories with characters around the age of their target audience will naturally resonate with those experiencing them. Aging established characters that the target audience has grown to resonate with without giving said audience time to experience that part of life for themselves can be risky. If your teenage characters are suddenly talking about filing taxes and having kids, but your target audience still hasn't experienced that in life yet, you run the risk of your audience not resonating with them anymore and then losing interest and by extension, sales. This is unfortunately the same reason we rarely see AAA video games with true minority representation, but that's a whole another video. Yo, thanks for watching. There are a few examples that I had that I didn't get to cover in this video, such as Metal Gear Solid 4 and Red Dead Redemption, I think. But I felt like that would have made the video a bit too long. I'm sure that there's other examples that I missed like this, so just let me know in the comments. Again, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, bell, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you next time.